There's a form of devotional writing known as hagiography. It comes from the Greek adjective holy and the verb to write, as it might. It's not unique to the Christian tradition, but certainly a major strand of it. It has inspired countless Christians through centuries. And it continues to be a strand of Christian writing. I recall at least one biography in which the subject benignly faces his death, excuse the noises in the background, calmly arranging for continuation of his spiritual affairs. And it was to meet the author's needs that the book was written in this way. No doubt the needs of most of the readership were massaged by this method. To face death quietly and calmly speaks volumes of the tenacity and the holiness of the dying person. Sometimes the family will, though, in private, tell a quite different story. Does this matter? There have been times I've been disparaging about this kind of writing, and perhaps those times have never ceased. I tend to be brutally realist in my taste and my teaching. I've seen enough struggles with dying and death to know it's no culture of calmness, or at least not until the wonderful tonics of palliative care medicines take over. Not always then. I have often noted, seen peaceful deaths died by atheists and struggled, angry deaths died by Christians. It's only natural to tell of brave struggles and peaceful ends, though there may sometimes be an oxymoron there, because that aids the grief of those who are left behind. And because that is a real need, I'm less disparaging now than I once was. Though, like my erstwhile colleague and perithanatos, that is, a roundabout death teacher and theologian Alistair Henry, his father, as it happens, buried mine, I feel it is critical that we acknowledge the brute finality of death, even as we in the Christian community hold to our doctrine of resurrection. As I've said elsewhere, I intend to die, not to pass away, not to cross over, not to enter some other room. Despite Jesus' use of those metaphors, the word die needs to be put out there. Jesus' own life and teachings make it clear that he does not sidestep the harsh issues of pain, of separation. He absorbs them, then, and only then, generates the resurrection hope that bursts through him and through them. So ours is a faith with death not passing or travelling to the other side, but death at its centre. Jesus is a fine moral teacher. He's one of countless. From what we can tell, his life was exemplary as he lived out a radical, somewhat revolutionary, somewhat reformatory Judaism, ignoring the conspiracy theorists who, for anti-Semitic reasons, want to maintain that Jesus was not a Jew. Jesus was one of many Jewish reformers in his time. They emerged in that very unsettled period of Palestinian history as the Roman Empire was beginning to show its cracks and overreach, like empires in our own day. In the chapter before our Acts reading today, we find Gamaliel reminding the Sanhedrin that the Jesus movement would be ephemeral if it were without substance, without divine blessing. Its longevity, which will, by the way, survive the current COVID crisis, just as it has overcome myriad trials before now, its longevity suggests Gamaliel was onto something, and Luke knew that only too well. So Jesus, while he focuses on issues of social justice, will address constantly that greatest injustice of all, death. Death, bereavement, grief. Death is at the heart of his teaching. Have a look at John 10:11. It's at the heart of his life, John 12:24-25. If you can glance at those passages sometime. Judgment, intimately entwined with death, is rarely far out of the focus of Jesus in his teaching. But judgment of Jesus is seen as encouragement, invitation, rather than discouragement. It is the encouraging ramification of his life, of his death, of his resurrection. The judgment of God is good news, not tyrannical doom. And again, John 5:22-24 takes us into the heart of those ideas. Baptism, that sacrament, that sign that Jesus gave to his followers, that central embodiment of his teaching, which you see at the end of Matthew's account of the gospel, is an enactment of death and of something following death. And so in conversation with his inner sanctum of disciples, Jesus addresses death and dying yet again. He offers no sidestep, but offers comfort in the face of death, comfort in the face of his own coming death and his listeners and our inevitable subsequent deaths. To find the fullness of that comfort, the verses that we have read on this day must be placed in the context of this whole teaching discourse of Jesus, delivered as he turns to face Jerusalem and all that implied for him. The prolonged teaching is inspired by the departure, you'll remember, of Judas, who has gone off to initiate his betrayal of Jesus, and walked out, and it was dark. Jesus speaks of his own death and resurrection, that intangible, incomprehensible something that he will not separate from death. Jesus steps into the darkest places now of betrayal, of agony, of shame, and only after that breaks out in light and life beyond comprehension. But break out he does. In the context of all these dimensions, Jesus speaks of being way, truth, life, and invites us to follow. It is, the context demands, no cushy invitation, though so far most of us have experienced it as a reasonably easy life, far easier than for many Christ followers around the world today and in the past. If the cross stands at the heart of this way, this truth, this life, how do we ensure that we adhere to the way, the cross? Jesus will speak over and again of the coming Spirit that he calls Paraclete, one who is called alongside. The hagiographies with which I began indicate that a life spent in adoration and service of Jesus should end in blessed Spirit-filled peace. Stephen's execution reinforces that belief. Yet there are no guarantees. Great hymns speak of meditating upon Jesus, implying, it seems, that if we do enough of that, our journey will be rosy. Who dies thus dies well. COVID-19 is just one reminder that there is and was never a universal truth about the experience of death. There's no doubt that many do find great peace in their own dying. Some will not, and that's not the point. Because the truth that John is conveying as he tells this story of Jesus is far deeper than that. The truth he bears is that even in our fears and failures, doubts, desertions and betrayals of our faith, even there, resurrection light will shine like nuclear fission. Our task is, as Brother Lawrence famously put it, to practice the presence of resurrection hope, love, light, and not least to be recalling that there are some judgment dimensions to that. My own naive interpretations of this scene revolve around some "oops, I'm sorry" moments. Reconciliation in the deepest and most eternal sense of this fiercely biblical theme. Then, and time is such an intrusion into these visions, we find ourselves before and within that overpowering light, where the Lamb is the light of the city of God, as another John put it, and Kathleen Armstrong Thomason captured with beautiful simplicity in her short hymn. The way to which Jesus invites us is not easy, despite being warm with his footprints, and despite the overflowing presence of the Spirit Advocate. But oh, what enrichment that presence is, as we stumble through life and death to the lamb-lit unseen city.